Can the Texas Longhorns exercise their Week 3 demons this Saturday against UTSA?
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis and Lacey Butler, your hosts. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, once again, can the Texas football team exercise their Week 3 demons they've had of late? I'll explain in the first segment this Saturday against UTSA. And the second segment, some players that have really impressed me over the first 2 weeks. Obviously, the whole football team has, but some players in particular that have really stood out to me over the first 2 weeks of the season. And then my top 5 Heisman candidates, bringing it back this week, every week of the season until the Heisman Trophy winner is announced. My top 5 Heisman candidates going into Week 3. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I am a Texas fan, right? I was about to say as a fan, but like as a fan and a content creator, it's so weird when you have such a big matchup like Michigan on the road, and then you have that drop off to, like, no disrespect, but UTSA, right? Because as a content creator, you build up, right? And you start talking before the game. Like you're so excited to talk about the build up to the Michigan game. And then you go out there and you win in that fashion. And then so you spend 2 to 3 days after recapping it and talking about it from all angles. But eventually you have to move on from Michigan and talk about the next opponent, which is UTSA, right? So there's just naturally some drop off. And it's like, man, leading up to the Michigan game, you're so excited. Then the day of the game, you're really excited, right? Then you're so excited to recap it and talk about it for like 2-3 days. But eventually you have to move on. And it's like a roller coaster, right? Because you went all the way up and then you're slowly coming down, right? And then you just shoot down and it's like, oh, hey, we play UTSA on Saturday. And then next Saturday, we play ULM. And then thankfully after that, we get back into the SEC schedule. So, like I said, as a content creator, it's been a little bit of a roller coaster. And I had to find some excitement to start talking about UTSA after Texas just went into the big house and beat Michigan. But, since Steve Sarkisian took over at the University of Texas, now in his 4th season, we've had a marquee matchup in Week 2 every year of the Steve Sarkisian era thus far at the University of Texas. You look at it in 2021, Arkansas wasn't a national championship contender. They weren't world beaters, but that's a historical rivalry, that was renewed on the road at Arkansas, from Texas and, Arkansas back in their SWC days. So that was a huge game for Texas and Arkansas, just what it meant, even though neither team, we would find out were national championship contenders that year. Then in 2022 and 2023, you had the home and home with Alabama playing in DKR in 2022, and then Texas going on the road to play in Alabama in 2023. And then, of course, this year, the game that we just saw, Texas going up to Ann Arbor to face off against the Michigan Wolverines on the road, right? So every year of the Steve Sarkisian era, we've had somewhat of a big matchup in Week 2. And then immediately following, there's always been a huge drop off in terms of the level of opponent and just the excitement for the game, period, in Week 3. Now, what's interesting to me, and when I talk about those Week 3 demons, is the last 2 years, Texas has struggled out the gate in Week 3 against opponents that they were way better than, right? And so when we've seen that the last 2 seasons, you have to wonder if Texas can avoid that this coming up Saturday against UTSA. I mean, they better. UTSA just got smoked by Texas State, right? And Texas State is not the University of Texas, but neither, are any of the teams we played in Week 2, right? And Steve Sarkisian already talked about how you don't want to have that drop off. He showed the team, the clips of Northern Illinois beating Notre Dame and said, if you don't take care of business, if you don't respect your opponent, this could happen to you, right? But like I said, the last 2 seasons, we've seen somewhat of a drop off in Week 3, right? In 2021, coincidentally, which is hilarious because that was one of the worst seasons in University of Texas football history. Texas goes on the road. Obviously, Hudson Card doesn't look good. I don't even think he threw for 70 yards passing. The team just looked a mess, and we essentially get doubled up by Arkansas. I think the final score was 40-21, right? We just get blown out on the road by, Arkansas in a game that, most Texas fans, really all Texas fans, will never forget, right? It was just an atrocious performance in the first year of Steve Sarkisian, and it kind of foreshadowed what we were about to see, that football team going 5-7. But then after that, the very next week after that, they played Rice at home and absolutely smoked Rice 58-0, including being up 44-0 at halftime, right? When a team like Texas plays a team like Rice, that's absolutely what should happen, right? But then Texas goes 5-7. Then you fast forward to the next season, 2022. Texas plays Alabama in week 2. It's Quinn Ewers' second start at the University of Texas, and he just comes out guns a-blazing, right? Just throwing, for over 100 yards in the first quarter. Texas plays a hell of a game. They're 21-point underdogs. They end up losing the game 20-19, and there was so much hype around the Texas team after that. I mean, the fans were super excited. I remember being at that game. It's still the, DKR record, 105,213 people. It was just magical to see a team that had just went 5-7 put on that type of performance, right? And then you had all the talking heads. Can Texas make the playoffs? Texas should be the obvious favorite to win the Big 12 after we lost to Oklahoma. Could Texas go? I mean, not to Alabama, excuse me, not Oklahoma. Obviously, we beat Oklahoma 49-0 that year. Could Texas go 11-1, right? There was just so much hype, so much rat poison, as Nick Saban would call it, around the Texas team because we were 21-point underdogs. And essentially, without the Quinn Ewers injury, without the holding call that they missed at the end where Bryce Young had that, heroic run, without the, safety that they reversed when Vernon Broughton got Bryce Young on the ground, Texas probably should have won that. So anyways, everybody's viewing, Texas as, this team that's possibly back and, was going to be one of the best teams in college football. And then the very next week, I was at the UTSA game in week 3, and Texas found themselves down 17-7 to UTSA. Now, that was Jeff Traylor. That was, probably the best UTSA team he's had, with what's the quarterback's name? Frank, I forgot his last name. But, they had really good wide receivers. It was a really good, UTSA team. Right. But Texas should have never been down 17-7 to UTSA. Right. And I think they eventually won that game 41-17 or 41-20, whatever it was. But that was a dogfight up until halftime. Right. With the Texas team that was way more talented than that UTSA team that they went against. Then the very next season. Right. Texas is riding high. They go into Alabama. This is last year. They go into Alabama in Bryant-Denny, whoop up on Jalen Milroe and Nick Saban, right? And Texas, proved to everybody that they should have been the favorite to win the Big 12, which they ultimately did. And they proved really in that moment that they were a legitimate playoff contender, which they ended up in, right? And so Texas, kind of shocked the world, I guess, because Alabama was still favorites. But Texas went into Alabama, into Nick Saban's house, and proved that they were one of the best teams in college football. And then the very next week, I was at that game again, so maybe it's my fault, right? They played against Wyoming in DKR, and that game was tied 10-10 going into the fourth quarter. Once again, the very next week after Texas went on the road and beat Nick Saban in Alabama, they come back home in a night game, right? And were tied with Wyoming going into the fourth quarter 10-10 before they scored 21 straight points and then ultimately beat Wyoming 31-10. So the last 2 years in week 3 after huge week 2 games, losing Alabama by 1 in 2022, beating Alabama on the road, Texas then struggled in their week 3 matchups at home against UTSA and Wyoming. So now after this big win against Michigan, right, everybody's feeling themselves. Texas feels like, they're, what doesn't stink. They feel like, obviously a top 2, arguably even the best team in the country right now. How do you avoid a letdown this weekend against UTSA? Now, obviously, like I said, the UTSA team you're facing on Saturday is nowhere close to the UTSA team you faced in 2022. But you know what I'm saying? The Texas team that faced UTSA in 2022 was way more talented. The Texas team that faced Wyoming last year was way more talented, and we still found ourselves in a dogfight in those games. Texas needs to come out on Saturday and make sure that they put UTSA away early. Internet's tripping out on me a little bit, but like I said, Texas needs to come out and beat up on UTSA early, put them away early, get Archman in the game, get a lot of young players an opportunity to play the game. Because just quite frankly, as much respect I have for Jeff Traylor, UTSA does not belong on the same field as the University of Texas. Just like you did with Colorado State, come out, punch them in the mouth, and put them away early. We should not see a close game in the first half like we've seen the last 2 years in week 3 against UTSA and Wyoming. I'm looking for Texas to come out and once again punch UTSA in the mouth, put them away early, because that team does not belong on the same field, especially our home field with the University of Texas. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into some of the players that have impressed me the most over the first 2 weeks, with Texas being the number 2 team in the country. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. If that's not enough, be sure to check out FanDuel's Profit Boost in the app and use it for FanDuel's Double Your Winnings for all of Sunday, September 15th pregame moneyline bets. Profit Boost will be live starting September 12th. View your account page now to learn more about your boost. Just visit FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by Factor Meals. Fuel up with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine. What are you waiting for? With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from, every week you always have new flavors to explore. Crush your wellness goals this May with dietitian-approved meals and ingredients that you can trust. Make your day delicious from breakfast to dessert. Stay fueled with easy, nutritious options. Head to factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 and use code LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code LockedOnCollege50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. All right, getting into some of the Longhorns that have impressed me the most over the first couple of weeks. Like I said, when you have the dominant performances, 52-0 against Colorado State at home, 31-12 against Michigan on the road, still the defending national champions, even though they're down to the number 17 team in the country. I'm not even sure they're that good, but I guess we'll see, over the remainder of the year, especially in a tougher Big Ten schedule now that you've added USC, Oregon, Washington, and teams like that. But we'll see. Nonetheless, Texas went in there and took care of business against that team. So, when you look at it, now, like I said, 5 players that I think, have really impressed me over the first couple of weeks, against Colorado State and against Michigan heading into this UTSA game on Saturday. The first one is Jake Majors. I think that, coming into the season, we recognized that, he had been here forever. I think they asked Steve Sarkisian, what impresses him the most about, Jake Majors. And he said the fact that he's 38 years old. But the same way we talk about really any position, you can see Quinn Ewers with his experience, how he's grown so much and, how he's able to come out and play at a high level in college football. Jake Majors came into the season with over 40 starts. At center. And, even though, obviously Kelvin Banks is our best offensive lineman, I think Jake Majors has, the most important job, right? Being at center, calling out the protections, making sure everybody's on the same page. And I think he makes everybody on that offensive line better. He makes Quinn Ewers better, our running game better. I just don't think this offense would function the way it has without a leader and just a dog at the center position, like Jake Majors. And I think, it was a huge test for him on Saturday, going up against Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. And I thought he more than held his own, was named, the SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week, so obviously he went out there and handled business. He just looks like a grown man, and like I said, coming into the season with over 40 starts at center, just being a veteran on that offensive line has helped this offense so much. So Jake Majors over the first 2 weeks, I already knew he was a really good football player, but he has really impressed me thus far. And, we talk about this offensive line being one of the best units in the country, possibly winning the Joe Moore Award, returning 4 or 5 starters. Jake Majors is one of the biggest reasons for that. So shout out to him. He's been absolutely exceptional over the first 2 weeks. Then Jarrett Gibson, right? Leading the team in rushing thus far, a rushing touchdown in the first 2 games. He was called on to a bigger role, with Cedric Baxter and Christian Clark being injured thus far. And he's really attacked it head on. And I know, I kind of made the joke earlier in the week that he's not, necessarily your normal true freshman because he is 20 years old. You know what I'm saying? He was at IMG in Florida. I don't know how they, he's 20 years old. So he's not your typical freshman, right? Soon enough here, he's going to be able to drink. But nonetheless, true freshman in the type of environments coming in that first game against Colorado State, then on the road at Michigan, he's just looked really exceptional behind that offensive line. And every time they've given him the ball, he's gotten tough, hard yards, right? Scored touchdowns, like I said, in the first 2 games, leading the Texas Longhorns in rushing at this point. And he just looks like a veteran, right? And so I talked about how the offensive line is great. I've talked about how Steve Sarkisian's offense is really running back friendly, but you still have to have dudes back there, right, to take the ball and pick up those tough yards. And Jared Gibson certainly has come onto scene as a true freshman and really looked like a veteran, in these first couple of games. And he's been such a huge asset to our running game. We truly have a three-headed monster at running back with Jaden Blue, Trey Wisner, and Jared Gibson. But we've seen Jaden Blue before, obviously Trey Wisner in limited opportunities, but he's been here at the University of Texas. Like I said, for Jared Gibson to just step on the scene in the first two games and already look like, somewhat a man amongst boys. I mean, gashing that Michigan defense, which is one of the best in the country. All the credit in the world to him. Like I said, still being a true freshman, hasn't even been on campus for a year yet and already, really paying dividends and being one of the best players on this Texas football team. Sticking with the true freshman, Ryan Wingo, right? I mean, he's just been, exceptional. We knew it from the day he stepped on campus, right? All we heard all offseason is Ryan Wingo does not look like a true freshman, right? In terms of his body, but also in terms of, just how he's looked, period, in terms of, his maturity and, his receiving acumen, right? Then he comes out in the first game, 70 yards, 43 yards after the catch or something like that. 3 first downs on 4 catches, just dominant, leading the team in receiving. And then he comes back and he gets his, number called one time in the Michigan game. It's his number called one time in the Michigan game, but it's the biggest offensive play Texas had all day. The 55-yard run on the jet sweep. Should have scored. I know they made fun of him in the film session, but nonetheless got Texas down in position to score a touchdown, and then Texas ultimately scored a touchdown. So when you look at it, Ryan Wingo, there's been a lot of great freshman receivers. This was a really good class for them. A lot of them have stepped on the scene and been really good right away. But, we talked about the receiving rotation coming into the season and what it would look like, right? Matthew Golden has been a staple. Isaiah Bond has been a staple. But really outside of that, we've seen Ryan Wingo just as much as any other wide receiver on the field, right? So to come in as a true freshman with all the talent we've had in that room and solidify himself in the rotation early and often just shows what type of football player he is. And like I said, over the first 2 games, over 100 yards from scrimmage, that confirms what type of football player he is. Just a dog, and I'm excited to see him this year and then, of course, the next 2 years at the 40 acres with Arch Manning and whoever else is playing quarterback. Jahdae Barron, this was a big test for him, a big year for him. He could have, entered the NFL draft last year, could have been in the NFL plan and, making huge plays last season, right? But he talked about the Sugar Bowl and how Texas, left some meat on the bone, left something on the table. He wanted to come back and prove that the University of Texas, could possibly win a national championship, and they very well could be on their way to doing that. But he also took on a bigger role, more responsibility, right? We used to see him in that star position playing around the line of scrimmage, but now that Jalen Gilbo is healthy, the staff felt like he was best in that position. But also Jahdae Barron wanted to prove that he could play outside, right? He didn't want to be labeled as a slot corner, as a nickel corner. He wanted to play cornerback, right? And through the first 2 games, I believe he's the highest graded cornerback in the SEC, according to Pro Football Focus. He's just been an absolute dog. Turnovers in the first 2 games, an interception in the first game against Colorado State, and then that fumble, that crazy fumble by Colston Loveland, where he just dropped the ball, but Jahdae Barron was there to pick it up. So he has a turnover in the first 2 games. He's been absolutely exceptional in coverage over the first 2 games. And, like I said, Jahdae Barron came back this year with more responsibility, and so far, so good, right? Obviously, we haven't played, just any elite passing offenses, right? We haven't played, the 2019 LSU Tigers yet or anything like that. But, you have to go out and dominate who's in front of you. And Jahdae Barron at outside corner has dominated who's been in front of him over the first 2 weeks. So really been impressed by him. Like I said, he's coming in a completely different role, and he's mastered it, at least thus far. And then Gunnar Helm, right? We saw Gunnar Helm behind Jatavian Sanders for a couple of years at the University of Texas, and we knew that he was more than capable, right? But we also knew he didn't have the athleticism and the physical profile that Jatavian Sanders had. We also know that tight end, Steve Sarkisian says it all the time, tight end is the second most important position in this offense. So how would Gunnar Helm step into this new role of being the guy at tight end, right? Being the guy that, Quinn Ewers would rely on at that tight end position, and being the guy that Steve Sarkisian would rely on at the tight end position to be explosive and, help this offense make plays, but also block, right? We know how much we run that inside zone, how much we run that 12 personnel. So Gunnar Helm spends a lot of time blocking and being kind of an additional, extra offensive lineman in this offense. And through 2 weeks with 333 rushing yards, over 100 receiving yards for Gunnar Helm and a touchdown, he's been absolutely exceptional. I said that, it's funny because, Jatavian Sanders gets named as the starting tight end for the Carolina Panthers, Then the very next day, Gunnar Helm goes out and has a career high 98 yards and a touchdown against Michigan. He's proven that, like his former tight end mate, Jatavian Sanders, he'll be able to make plays at a high level in the National Football League one day as well. And he's been absolutely exceptional over the first 2 weeks. Definitely one of the best players on the team and maybe one of the biggest surprises on the team. I'm not sure if everybody thought Gunnar Helm would be an asset to this offense coming into the season. I want to say not an asset, but I don't know if people thought that Gunnar Helm would have played as well as he did the first 2 weeks. I really don't think anybody thought Gunnar Helm would be our leading receiver in the Michigan game. So he's been a lot better, than a lot of people thought he would be. And I think he's going to continue to improve and continue to be one of the best tight ends in the country over the course of the season. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into my top 5 Heisman candidates before we get out of here on Thursday's episode of Locked On Longhorns. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns also brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, getting into my top 5 Heisman candidates. I'm going to go 5 through 1 to create, I guess, some, sort of suspense. But number 5, I got Nico Yamaleva from Tennessee. I still don't think I'm saying his last name right, but, it's probably close enough. Forgive me, or I know he's not watching this, right? But forgive me if anybody related to him or anybody who's a huge fan of him is watching it. 596 total yards and 6 touchdowns through 2 games, and just had that huge victory over NC State on the road, 51-10, right? They absolutely smoked NC State in that game. And he did have 2 interceptions. He did have a pick 6, but I think overall he's been exceptional, especially in the first game against Chattanooga, where he only played the first half. And then, just getting a ranked win, even though I thought Tennessee was way better than NC State, getting a ranked win like that on the road, over 40 points, beating them, margin of victory. And like I said, he threw a pick 6, in that game. But he's just been great in his second and third start, right? We look at Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma, and it's been completely different, right? So he's come out and, already proven he's one of the best quarterbacks in college football, putting up good numbers, putting up good stats. And he has a huge win on the road at NC State, a ranked win in just his third start. So I'm putting Nico Yamaleva out of Tennessee at number 5 at my Heisman rankings. Number 4, familiar face, familiar name, Quinn Ewers for Texas, right? Number 4 in my Heisman rankings, top 5 Heisman candidates. He was not in my Heisman candidates last week, but obviously the big win on the road at Michigan. I got to put him at number 4. Only 500 total yards and 6 touchdowns through 2 games. So the 500 total yards, a little pedestrian compared to some of the other players on this list. But like I said, the big win at Michigan, and also completing 70% of his passes. You have to put Quinn Ewers in the Heisman conversation right now based on his performance on the road at Michigan, which I believe is the biggest win of the college football season. Number 3, I have Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss. They still haven't played anybody, but if they had, he'd probably be number 1 because he is putting up astronomical numbers. 814 total yards through the first 2 games, even though they've been against Middle Tennessee and Furman. You got to play who's on the schedule, right? 814 total yards and 8 touchdowns through the first 2 games. He has 8 touchdowns and 7 incompletions this season. All right, I'm going to say that again. He has 8 touchdowns compared to 7 incompletions this season, which is absolutely insane. Jackson Dart has been on fire. I got him at number 3 on my Heisman rankings. We'll see how he looks when he finally plays somebody, but through the first 2 games, he's been absolutely exceptional. If they had played a decent opponent by now, he'd probably be number 1 on my list because, like I said, he's just been on fire. Number 2, Carson Beck, right? I had him at number 2 last week, have him at number 2 again. only 557 total yards. So he hasn't just been, absolutely lighting it up, right? But he does have 7 touchdowns to 0 interceptions thus far and a 71% completion percentage. And then the big win in the neutral site against Clemson, which is a really good defense. And then he came out last week and had 5 touchdowns in their game. I can't remember who they played, but it was just, nobody, and Georgia absolutely smoked them. So I got Carson Beck still at number 2 in my Heisman rankings. And then number 1, I have Cam Ward, right? Cam Ward was number 1 last week. Cam Ward, once again, number 1 this week from Miami. The big win last week at Florida. And then they came back and played, I believe, Florida A&M or somebody like that this week. But he's number 1 in my Heisman rankings again. 735 total yards and 7 touchdowns through 2 games with a QBR of 94.9, which is second in the country right now amongst all quarterbacks. So Cam Ward has been absolutely phenomenal. And somebody's going to have to either play a bigger opponent or outplay Cam Ward in one of these games to jump above him in my Heisman. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.